This is Indonesia. 13,000 islands stretching from Asia to Australia. It boasts 34% of the world's active volcanoes, including the most famous of them all. The Sunda Straits, dividing Java from Sumatra, 1925.
A new island is born in the South Seas. The daredevil aviators of the East Indies risk their lives to bring you these motion pictures of the awesome fury of nature. Scientists keep ceaseless vigil, for this is the very spot where only 50 years ago, Krakatoa erupted with the loudest explosion in history. Thousand souls perished in its terrible tidal wave. And the ash, blocking out sunlight, claimed millions more lives in the worldwide droughts and famines which followed.
Today, not much is left of Krakatoa. But the little island, born in 1925, is still growing. The locals rather ominously call it Anak Krakatau, child of Krakatoa. Lorne and I got there exactly 100 years after the Great Catastrophe, when it was so active again that the government had warned us not to attempt a landing. The ground was hot underfoot, and hissing boulders were falling nearby us. It was a clear sky, except over the volcano, which was creating its own thunderstorm, sending lightning crashing down into its crater. I'm actually getting rained on now with volcanic ash that's been brought down by a very light drizzle. The remarkable thing about these islands is that the Indonesians, of course, have lived here for millennia on the brink of a shaking, eruptive, and totally unreliable earth. From them we hope to learn something of what it's like to live now on the brink of the totally unexpected. This was our first real foray into Java, and I didn't know what we were in for any more than Lorne.
I was more afraid of the drivers at first from the volcanoes. But as we drove deeper into Java, we found that they dominate the entire landscape. And many of them are potential Krakatoas. Over 120 million people are crammed into this island, the size of England or California. And they all live with only one certainty: that sooner or later their lives will be shattered by an eruption. So they find stability elsewhere.
Allahu Akbar.
95% of all Javanese are Muslims. But they don't rely on Islam alone for keeping their balance on a shifting, dangerous earth. From the 7th century, and probably much earlier, Indian traders brought Hindu and Buddhist teachings, and the Javanese built mountains of stone to link heaven and earth. The high plateau of Dieng is one of the island's most sacred places. Here we found the earliest Hindu temples in the island. Offerings to Hindu deities are made by supposedly Muslim pilgrims who flock to the valley. They also pay homage to an even older god, for here, at the exact center of Java, is the cave of Semar, whose influence over the island dates back to its earliest animist beginnings. Portrayed as a grotesque and clownish dwarf, Semar is also the wise teacher of all the heroes of Hindu-Javanese mythology. He is the guardian spirit of Java's soil. Pilgrims who come to meditate in the darkness leave it carpeted with petals. But they say that a whole night alone in here can leave your sanity in shreds. The powers of Semar are very real. His whole valley is a seething cauldron. Only 2 years before Lawrence and I got here, an earthquake released poisonous gases that instantly killed almost half the inhabitants of the valley. It can, and probably will, happen again. From these high valleys, where Java man, an early candidate for Darwin's missing link, once roamed, we made our way down towards the coast. Through rice terraces sculpted by civilizations we now know almost nothing about. The Javanese of today are still in touch with the same elemental spirits that dominated those forgotten kingdoms. And one of the most powerful lives in the Southern Ocean. Just as Semar rules the rumbling earth, Ratu Kidul rules the dangerous waters. On the south coast, we found an entire fishing community going out to pay its annual respects. It was an unusually calm morning as they launched miniature Javanese houses, complete in every detail. These are offerings to Ratu Kidul, the goddess of the South Seas. On a nearby cliff top, we found a more modest offering, wrapped in banana leaves. And the men who had made it. They don't settle for making gifts to her once a year, but every time they go to work. Understandably, for theirs must be one of the most dangerous professions. They seek their livelihood in the very embrace of Ratu Kidul, in a cave at the bottom of this cliff. They've inherited the right, passed down through hundreds of generations, to gather the wealth of the cave, if they dare. They're collectors of valuable birds' nests for birds' nest soup. From here, they must make their way in under the overhang, along precariously suspended bamboos. Then they must drop into an incoming wave to be carried into total darkness. Getting out is more difficult, as one of them explained to Lawrence.
He told me how he had misjudged the tide a few years back. He'd been trapped in the cave for 35 days. He lived in total darkness, like an animal. He ate live swift hatchlings and dung grubs, which taste like their diet. The conditions were the same again today, and it had become too dangerous to get inside. The fishermen do more than just make offerings to Ratu Kidul. They go to some trouble to listen to what she has to say about them. But the rite of the leaping horse, back in the village that afternoon. It started off calmly enough, but almost immediately they were going into trance. Then, possessed by the spirits of the celestial horses they rode, they were soon eating horse fodder with apparent relish. They were observed closely and brought out of trance at the slightest sign of being possessed by the wrong spirits. I thought it was all some kind of mass hysteria at first. It seemed rather chaotic and disturbing. Then a few of the older men went into deeper trance, helped by the incense. We were told that Ratu Kidul might speak through one of them, with her view of their offerings and the coming fishing prospects. Suddenly, he's no longer a horse, but a monkey. He begins rubbing himself with burning coals. He starts to speak the words of Ratu Kidul. She would give them plenty of fish that year, but take a few of their sailors. That night, there was a traditional all-night shadow play to honor the goddess. From village to palace, no celebration is complete without one. For the Javanese, this is much more than mere entertainment. The shadow screen is a window onto another world. The audience watches from what I'd always thought was the real world. But this, they told me, is just the pale shadow of the reality beyond. Here, gods and demons, heroes and ancestors, spirits and divine clowns strut on the stage of the cosmos. All these eternal characters are seen as being as much within us as outside us. For the Javanese, to venture beyond the world of shadows is to make a journey of self-discovery. That was the night we learned the bizarre news that the South Sea goddess is married to a human being. He's sometimes called the Mountain, and they say he lives both sides of the shadow screen. If we wanted to meet him, we'd have to get inside his walled palace in central Java. Entering the outer gates, we saw the tower, where one special night each year, they told us, the marriage between the South Sea goddess and the human mountain is consummated. It took a bit more than just dressing correctly with the ceremonial sword in our waistbands to be admitted to the inner court of the Sultan of all Java. I felt myself becoming part of a shadow play, unfolding in some forgotten corner of time. A medieval court, smelling of incense and danger, and seething with intrigues. At the center of the drama is Sri Susunan Pakubuwono XI, the hereditary link between the millions of Javanese and their eternal pantheon of pre-Islamic gods. This was the 1 week in the year when the most powerful heirlooms in the land are cleansed and paraded through the streets. Spears and swords, magical weapons, shed their royal guardian's energy amongst the people. Unexpectedly, our friends at court managed to arrange an audience with the Sultan, the earthly lover of the South Sea goddess. It was all very odd. Protocol required we address him only through his minister, his mouth on earth, so to speak, to whose answers he merely nodded his approval or otherwise.
And the treasures that we bring out is in fact not only treasures from this house, but also treasures from the whole country, because through all the treasures is the Javanese history built up until what we have now, until Indonesia is merdeka.
But then the Sultan broke the rules. He addressed us directly, saying that if we hurried, we could glimpse one of the most sacred objects in the palace, something never seen by outsiders. Our allies were quick to encourage us before a rival faction could change his mind. They rushed us through a maze of passageways towards the depths of the palace. We still hadn't understood where we were going. This was the legendary Nura meteorite, which centuries earlier had landed in temple grounds, gassing every living thing for miles around. From its stellar alloys are forged the most powerful krises in the land. The kris is much more than the traditional sword of Java. Some, and particularly this one, are believed to contain powerful spirits, so the kris makers are required to have supernatural powers.
Zaman Pakubuwono ke-7 itu membuat 7, tapi mungkin menurut yang sampai sekarang Empu Wanita ini sangat termasyhur karena karyanya kebanyakan bagus sekali.
Some would forge these blades in a state of trance, pressing their thumbprints into the molten hot metal,
Waktu bikinnya dulu, ini besi
imbuing them with their own life force. We could clearly see the imprints.
ya
And he taught us how to spot the fakes. Sometimes they would also cool the blades with their lips, leaving crescent moon shapes.
Jadi ini pakai apa namanya akapan istilahnya. Makanya ini kelihatan sekali seperti ada rembulan.
Ya.
Seperti ada rembulan.
It's during this week that the Sultan's most sacred krises are cleansed in scented waters containing lime and arsenic. The water becomes infused with the heavenly power of the krises and the Sultan. And later in the palace courtyard on this one night a year, his subjects fight for contact with the poisonous but heaven-charged water. We found this familiarity with the supernatural isn't just confined to rural villages and arcane courts. It was in the big city, where Java confronts the 20th century, that we got a real shock. Lorne was suffering from a bad eye infection at the time, a cameraman's cause for panic.
Lawrence had heard of a man who might be able to help and dragged me to him despite my reservations.
Is it in? Yes. Good Lord. You just relax and enjoy, Lord.
He uses acupuncture needles in the traditional points, but with a twist. Through them, he directs a form of electricity, as he calls it. But he doesn't draw the electricity from a wall socket. He claims to generate it within his own body. It was nothing like any acupuncture I'd ever had. I was getting really powerful electric shocks and couldn't control my movements at all. He says that what he does is no more supernatural than an electric eel, which also knows how to harness its yin and yang energies.
Yin yang, positive and negative, you know. And my positive from here and my negative from here. And we meet together, this can get like electricity.
And is this because you're special? You have a special sort of body?
Meditation every day.
It's meditation, does it?
Meditation every day. Like a yoga. But I study about 18 years.
18 years?
18 years, from my child before.
Can you project this energy through your hands only, or through other things as well?
Only my hands.
Only your hands.
Like you can touch me, like this. It's nothing, okay? It's my burn. Just like this.
Our sound recordist, Simi, was skeptical at first. Later, he told us that anybody could learn this. God had given us all the yin-yang polarity, but it takes discipline and meditation to awaken and control it. And you must be very aware of your emotions. This energy can be dangerous. It can kill as well as heal. Then he asked for our newspaper. Whatever he had done to our newspaper, it's how he'd healed my eyes that made me wonder. What do these people living in the shadows of the volcanoes still know that we of the West have forgotten? Mount Galunggung took everyone by surprise. Overnight, entire villages had ceased to exist. Under the midday rain of ash, survivors didn't know which way to flee. Many had lost home and family forever. Miles away, houses were crushed by the ash. More deadly than the creeping lava flows were boiling waves of volcanic mud. They raged across the countryside at up to 40 miles an hour. How our friend Ruska Hadian, sitting in a tree, had the nerve to keep filming is quite beyond me. He was rescued by helicopter just before his tree came down. The government is more worried by Mount Semeru, Java's tallest and most sacred mountain. It has now reached the height beyond which all Javanese volcanoes have blown themselves apart. Mount Merapi broods over the most densely populated part of the island. Both scientists and mystics agree that it's on the verge of a massive eruption. Yet the millions living on its slopes calmly continue dredging its rivers for the volcanic minerals which keep their land so fertile. The Javanese take their volcanoes very seriously, not because they're occasional bringers of death, but because they're constant givers of life. Narrow straits separate East Java from Bali, where all life and ritual revolves around the great mountain, Gunung Agung, home of the gods. It last erupted in the 1960s, just 12 years before we'd built our house here. And when we returned from Java, we were welcomed home by the village priest. When Islam swept through Indonesia in the 14th century, only Bali resisted it. Here, the blend of Hindu-Buddhism, which had dominated Java for centuries, still flourishes. For the first time in my life, ritual was beginning to have some real meaning for me. It seemed like an acknowledgement of a dimension beyond our physical world, of a realm more substantial, perhaps, than the very unsure earth we walk on.
Maka itu kita mata itu dan sesajian itu kebersihan itu supaya terus.
I couldn't help feeling a certain envy for our Indonesian friends and neighbors, like Dewa Batuan, who seems perfectly at ease with this other world. Batuan, who owns the land we've built our house on, is our closest friend in Bali. He explained that the ritual was to ensure that we'd never go short of food.
By now, Lorne and I knew him well enough to realize he wasn't talking about physical food. The Balinese are seldom short of a meal. They're most concerned with the sustenance which comes through their ritual arts, the real food for themselves and the gods. Batuan's young nieces practice their temple dance. amongst them, I felt we were drawing closer to the shadow screen, beyond which lay a much subtler and perhaps more dangerous adventure. Trance and possession in every form are all around us. It's not unknown for people to go into trance and never manage to come out of it again. It was at the start of the monsoon rains that Batuan took us to a remote temple to witness the Sangyang Jarang trance. They clasp effigies of the serpent horses that the sun god Surya rides through the sky. If fully possessed by his energy, they become immune to fire. What had seemed rather extreme and pointless feats to me were beginning to make sense. It was through trance I realized that they could travel beyond the shadow screen. Batuan told me one has to explore both sides of the screen, the dark and the light, to be able to harmonize the two. Someone who really embodied this ability, he said, was our neighbor, the great artist, Gusti Nyoman Lempad. When I spoke to him here, he was 116 years old. The long fingernails of his left hand symbolize that his powers extend beyond his physical body. The great sage of Hindu-Balinese mythology and the arts. He was known even in Europe in the 1920s for his superb religious and erotic art. But at home, it's for his temple sculpture and architecture that he's most recognized. Lempad has left his mark on 20th century Bali. Born into an era of omnipotent princes, he survived into the age of astronauts, one of whom he actually met when Ron Evans sought him out in his Highland community. The two exchanged very different views of the moon that Evans had actually walked on, and which Lempad had touched in other ways. This early drawing tells the story of the 7 celestial nymphs of the Pleiades, who fly down using their sarongs as wings to bathe in the waters of the world. A young prince spies on them, falls in love with the youngest and steals her sarong, so she can't fly back to the heavens. He returns it to her only when she bears him a child, half heaven, half earth. That child is all children. If a Balinese child cries at night, he's comforted by being shown the night sky. There is your mother, they tell him, who we all come from and where we all return, so there's no reason for tears.
Lawrence had read somewhere about a tribe on another island that believed its first ancestors had literally descended from the stars in skyships. So off we went again. Our destination was Celebes, and our landfall Bira, where our Indonesian adventure had begun so many years before. Little had changed on these beaches where the Boogie Pirates build their sailing prows. But we found the Sinar Surya, the prow we'd once sailed east aboard, had returned to die on the beach where she was born. And in the village, we found that her owner, the local chieftain, was also dead. His widow told me that our old friend and benefactor had recently been murdered on the beach near the Sinar Surya.
Bukan untuk mau memajukan, saya rasa desa ini dan masyarakat.
This time we'd come to Celebes looking for a tribe living high in the mountains, at the very center of the island. We'd been lent a jeep. A good thing, because it turned out to be one of those roads. After 12 hours lurching and slithering along the edges of barren precipices, we reached their valley. This is the home of the Toraja tribe. Their name means the people from above. In a hilltop village, around a bamboo tower, we found a festival warming up. The tower, they told us, is a stairway to the stars. And the litters carry young virgins, celestial nymphs. The Toraja were first contacted by Westerners at the beginning of this century. They were fierce warriors and occasional headhunters. Priests chanted the history of the clan. They paused often to refresh themselves from foaming bamboos of potent palm wine, an essential ingredient for all Toraja rituals. The four elders footing the bill for all this led their families around the tower. The Sarita textile, with its intricate symbols, links them back through the generations to the stars of their origins. This is a celebration of wealth, and the Toraja are certainly not shy about displaying it. The banknotes are all of the highest denomination. By the time the ceremony is over, the hosts will have given it all away. There seemed to be no sense of loss. They'd contributed to the clan. More important, they'd honored the ancestors, who are never far away. They must now start accumulating all over again to prepare for the other great celebration of their life, their death.
This is a Toraja cave of the dead. We found these mountains riddled with them. I was brought up to keep my distance from mortal remains. But not the Toraja. Even the children come here to delve into the ark-like coffins. They rearrange and play with the skulls of their families. Lowland pirate tribes would raid these caves for treasure, so the Toraja took to hollowing out vaults in the high cliff faces and balconies which they lined with totem effigies of their dead, carved in their likeness. Rounding a corner one day, we found them lowering the effigies from the highest vault in the highest cliff. They were cleaning and redressing them for the death rites of the last king of the tribe. The king's first ancestors, they told us, descended from the Pleiades in a starship. They still build their houses in the ark-like forms of that ship to remind them, they say, of their origins. The carved symbols on their walls form a subtle language. From the ground up can be read their entire genealogical tree stretching all the way back to the Pleiades. Across the fields, an entire ceremonial village is being built, just for this occasion, to house the thousands of funeral guests. The village would be torn down afterwards. This is the house of Lasso Rinding Puang Sanggala, last king of the Toraja. He had died 4 years before our arrival, and his body had been lying here at home ever since while the tribe prepared for his send-off. For these 4 years, his widow had not left his side. Wrapped in rich textiles, his corpse had long since desiccated, and only the faintest odor of death remained. The girls are kept busy husking rice for the guests who would arrive from the farthest corners of the valley. The rhythm they use is unique to the occasion, an invitation to a feast, the music of death. And the guests arrive. They bring gifts of rice, palm wine, and sacrificial offerings of pigs and water buffalo. The rites of death revolve around the buffalo. For a dead nobleman, dozens must be killed. For the last king,